Everybody, Quantum here, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at the Amethyst card pool from Shimmering Skies. Today is August the 9th. It is just past 5 p.m. Just finished up work, so wanted to make this video as it is officially release day in hobby stores. So we should see prices start to be stabilized a little bit. What's interesting is until there are, some really big official events, a lot of these cards are going to either be really undervalued or really overvalued. So I'm going to try to give you my opinion on where I think things are at. Let's go ahead and jump straight in. First up, we have Maleficent, Formidable Queen. So I think right now we can write this one off because it is an 8 cost uninkable that shifts for 6, which is nice. The 7/7 body, quest for 2, all great stats. But the actual effect is kind of underwhelming. When you play this character, for each of your characters named Maleficent, which includes itself, in play, you may return chosen opposing character, item, or location with cost 3 or less to the player's hand. So at very least, if you shift this, let's say, or if you just raw play this out, you have at least one card named Maleficent in itself, so you can target one thing with cost 3 or less and bounce it back to the hand. But if you have more than one Maleficent, you can choose multiple things, obviously. I don't really see any deck where this will be applicable right now, mainly because, character-focused decks aren't a thing yet, but in the future they might be. We have a number of different Maleficent cards. We have like the 1-drop Maleficent Biding Her Time, Maleficent Sorceress. We have 2 more Maleficents in this card pool from Shimmering Skies in and of itself. We have a couple of Maleficents in Sapphire already. So it is a pretty prominent character in the game so far. And if we do get a lot more playable Maleficents, and we do have a couple of good playable ones already, this card could potentially become really good later on. The ability to bounce cost 3 or less things may seem a little underwhelming for its cost of 8, but it's still very relevant. There are a number of like floodgatey kind of things coming to this game, it looks like the new Prince John Mirror, which this card can help deal with. But right now in the meta, I don't think any ink pairing, not even Amethyst Sapphire, really would want to play this. I mean, I guess the thing with Sapphire is you can play anything because it doesn't matter if it's uninkable or not. You have Fishbone Quill, so this could have some value there, but again, I just think for 8, you just have better value cards right now because you're not going to proc this ability on multiple triggers because you're not playing like a Maleficent focused deck. Anyways, moving on, we have the Nokk, a 6 cost inkable 5/5 body, so decent stats, but it also has a nice ability similar to Belle Accomplished Mystic from set 4, where when you play this character, move up to 2 damage counters from chosen character to chosen opposing character. Again, when you're looking at a card, it could just be good, but there are just better things to play in place of it, especially for its cost. So maybe in draft this would be good, but I don't think this sees any play in competitive play, unless you're on like a really budget deck and this card, may be something you can use. But even so, I mean, Belle hit Accomplished Mystic is like $1, so I don't really think it's that much of a budget option, even so. Next up, we have a card that I am actually kind of excited about in Cogsworth Illuminary Watchman. This is a 1 cost inkable 1/1 character that quests for 1 but has a very interesting ability. It's basically White Rabbit's Pocket Watch on a character because when you play this, you get give a chosen character rush. So obviously, when you think about this card, you need to think about it in terms of, if I want to play a 4 cost character and give it rush, I need 5 ink. So I'll need to play that and then play the Cogsworth with it. And the immediate interaction that comes to mind here is something like the new Madam Mim Elephant, which we can go over in just a little bit. But I really do like this because, yes, it's a character, which means you can constantly cycle it with Mim Foxes, Mim Snakes, Mim Elephants even. And it's not like the White Rabbit's Pocket Watch where it costs 3 and you have to pay an ink every turn to use it, and then that item is susceptible to removal, whereas this card you can play it and bounce it to protect it right away, and therefore give your character rush and then get this card back to your hand to protect it. So a lot of potential interesting things with this card. I think there are a number of ink pairings where this would work very well in. I think it works with Amethyst Sapphire, Amethyst Steel, Amethyst Ruby, because there are a lot of cards in those ink pairings, especially on the Steel side, that you would love to give rush to. Like imagine dropping a Tinkerbell and then giving it rush, right? Like you would need 7 ink because you drop Tinkerbell, deal 1 damage to everything, drop the Cogsworth, give the Tinkerbell rush, use Tinkerbell to take out a threat, deal 2 more damage to something else. That's essentially a board wipe. So that's the kind of stuff that this card can facilitate, and it doesn't require the same setup of I needed to play a White Rabbit's Pocket Watch on 3. It's kind of like awkward because that uses my turn basically to establish the Pocket Watch, and then it's an item that can get outed and I might get no value out of it. Whereas Cogsworth is just like, let me play, get the immediate value. And that's why I like this card. And the reason why this card would be better than something like a Pinocchio like the 2-cost uninkable card that would exert a character that we played in the past, is this is inkable, and that makes the world of difference, because the Pinocchio could be very underwhelming at times, whereas this, I think you just know immediately I'm getting the value right away, and you know, I'm potentially doing a huge play, a tempo swing play with it. Next up, we got a new Merlin in the Turtle, a 4-cost inkable 3/3 body that quests for 2, so pretty decent stats all around, with an ability that allows you to scry 2, put 1 to the top, 1 to the bottom of the deck. So again, a good ability. In draft, I imagine this card is really nice, but in constructed, I don't think you play this in the 4-cost slot, because you have goats, rabbits. If you're playing this in Amethyst Sapphire for the Merlin shift, you have, you know, I think another 4-cost Merlin in Sapphire, but this one's probably better than that one from the first chapter anyways, because that one is just the vanilla support. But you also have Hiram on 4, right? And obviously a couple other things. So I think it's really competitive to try to fit this in at 4. But I picked up a foil playset. I think I paid like 25 cents each, so like $1 for a foil playset or something. It's not bad to just have. And again, could be cool in like a very specific kind of like theme deck. Next up, you got Archimedes Exasperated Owl. So a 3-cost inkable 2/2 character that quests for 2 and has evasive. So underwhelming stats, because it gets brawled, it gets storm raged. You know, it does have evasive and it does quest for 2, so it is an aggro threat. But we'll take a look at another card that, in my opinion, is just a little bit better for 1 more cost. This is a potential shift target, but the shift target that we got in this set is also shift 3, so you don't want to like play this on 3 and then shift the shift target on turn 4 onto this, because that's just like awkward. Whereas, you know, you have the 1-drop Archimedes that you can use that shift target on. So this card, I think, is a little underwhelming. I don't know if there's any abilities in the game that proc when you have an Archimedes in play, but even so, like, it's not really relevant right now. But the Bruni is the card that I would opt to play instead if you were looking for a budget aggro strategy with Amethyst. A 4-cost inkable 2/2 character that quests for 2, has evasive, and then it has the additional ability of when it's banished, it replaces itself. So if it does get brawled or storm raged, like, you're fine, because you're like, okay, it just replaced itself. And if they use tempo to brawl this, let's say, like they pay 3 ink, they likely don't do anything else significant that turn, especially if you're playing on curve. And so even though you paid 4 for this and you got brawled for 3, it passes back to you and you just develop another aggro threat, right? So the card replacement ability of this card, I think, makes it a lot better, even though it costs 1 more than the Archimedes, because the risk you run with this is that it dies and then you're just down a resource, right? Whereas other decks that aren't aggro might have card draw, like more aggressive card draw engines, whereas you're really depending on, I need to quest with my characters, I need to get the value out of them when I play them, and if they just get outed right away because of underwhelming stat lines, you know, it just doesn't do anything for you. Next up, we got the Earth Giant Living Mountain, a 4-cost inkable 4/5 body that quests for 2. When you play this character, each opponent draws a card. Won't see play outside of draft, and even in draft, it probably isn't that good. And then you got Gale, Wind Spirit, 3-cost inkable 1/2 body, quest for 2. When this character is banished in a challenge, return this card to your hand. This is a very powerful, underrated ability. Unfortunately, on this kind of character, it's not really that great. What I would have loved to see is maybe this character having rush and maybe questing for 1, because then it introduces you to being able to use a lot of like interesting interactions with this. Like maybe you run this in an Amber Amethyst deck with the Queen that can boost up the strength of this. Then you drop it, it has rush, you boost it up by 4. It now becomes a 5/2 body that can out a threat and it goes back to your hand, right? Or you have like Ruby Chromacons to boost us up, or Medallion Weights to boost us up and being able to draw a card when it challenges. But in its current form, this is a card, because it quests for 2, you drop this, you quest with it, and you hope your opponent is forced to challenge into it. In draft, I can see this card being extremely powerful since you have very limited forms of non-challenging removal, but in constructed, I just think somebody outs this another way, and even if they do out it with challenging, it's just, you know, it's 3 costs, it's kind of expensive to just replay a 1/2 body. Kind of puts you a little bit behind on tempo, but it does quest for 2, so it is very interesting. Could potentially see play, but I just think, again, the 3-cost slot in Amethyst is very, very competitive with Mims, Mim Foxes and stuff in there, so might not see any play. Next up, we got White Rabbit, just a vanilla 3-cost inkable 3/4 that quests for 1. Might see a future shift target for the rabbit, but you know, even so, just kind of underwhelming. Again, the 3-cost slot is very competitive in the Amethyst color. Okay, Mim Elephant. I hope the foil copies drop, because I really do want to pick up some foil ones. I bit the bullet and bought 2 non-foils for $4 each, which I don't think is necessarily bad value. Long term, I think this card will probably stabilize at $3 to $4 Canadian, maybe even a little bit more, because I think people will realize how important this card is. It's very good for what it does. A 3/7 body on 4 that bounces, it just facilitates more Mim cycling, and it has a very powerful underrated ability that if it does stick around on board, which it likely will since it has 7 willpower, at the start of your turn you may move up to 2 damage counters from this character to a chosen opposing character. If you're not prepared to deal with a Mim Elephant and it comes down and it's constantly able to just take out threats or get damage on it and just move the damage over and over again, you will get put behind. Like, this card can swing tempo massively if you're not prepared for it and what it can do. I think this card is really overlooked right now. It is very, very good, and it should, like, it's not a 4 of, I don't think. I still have to test some more, but I think like at least 2, maybe even 3 would be good. Again, I only bought 2, hoping to pick up 2 foil copies, but I'm not paying, like, I don't even want to pay $15 Canadian for them. I'm hoping the foil ones go to like 10, and the non-foils maybe stabilize around 3 to 4. But yeah, this card is meta relevant, so definitely keep an eye out for this one if you need them. And just try to grab them at a good price, because I do think over time this goes up. And again, you don't have to take my advice for it. I called this stuff all the way back in Floodborne when I said, you can go back to my market watches that I posted, I don't even know how many months ago now, like 4 or 5 months ago, where I talked about Merlin rabbits, Madam Mim foxes. These were starter deck cards, but they were so good that they're gonna go up in price because Amethyst needs to play these cards. They're so good, and that's exactly what happened. This card is falling into that same boat, in my opinion. Next up, we have Luisa Madrigal. Funny that this is a rare. I mean, they should have made this inkable, because, like, I mean, Surfer Stitch is a 7-cost inkable 4/8 body that quests for 2 and draws 2 cards. I mean, I know that's a legendary and this is a rare, but like, even if this was inkable, this would not see play probably. I guess in draft this card would be really strong, but aside from that, I don't really see it being played in Amethyst, because whatever ink pairing you pair Amethyst with likely just has a better 6-cost card anyways. Okay. The Anna Mystical Majesty. I am a huge fan of this card, but again, it's very awkward. 7-cost uninkable, 4/5 body, shift 4, so you get a value of 3 if you are able to shift it. And this does have a good shift target in Sapphire, in my opinion. Unfortunately, the shift target in Amethyst is uninkable. If it was inkable, it'd be a different story, but like, if you can pair this with Amethyst and Sapphire Amethyst, or sorry, pair this with Sapphire and Sapphire Amethyst, I think this card could be really good, because one of the main drawbacks of why Sapphire Amethyst really wasn't a meta threat is because it doesn't really have a way to deal with boards. It doesn't have Be Prepared or anything like that, right, or steel-based removal. But with Amethyst having a lot of rush characters now and having ways to like tap things down, you can use this ink color with other non-removal based inks, right, like non-steel, non-ruby. Because if you have things like the Anna, the Elsa that can tap things down, you can use the characters from those other colors to then take out opponents' threats. And this card will greatly help facilitate that, especially in Sapphire, where the uninkability thing in Sapphire usually isn't too much of a detriment if you're running Fishbones. But again, just because it has the synergy of the good Anna braving the storm in Sapphire is also nice. Ideally, you do want to shift this. Probably not always on 4, again, depending on the board state and the scenario that you're in, the matchup that you're in. But you shift this, you have a huge body on board, potentially by turn 4, you exert all of your opponent's threats, you trade out your stuff into your opponent's things, and then you now have board control. And you have a 2-questing 4/5 body on board, a 7-cost character that comes down potentially on 4, 5, or 6. Turns 4, 5, or 6, that is. So yeah, a really strong card. I did pick up foil copies. I probably overpaid. I paid $2.50 and $3 each, but I just really wanted the foil ones because I'm a huge fan of cards like this. Even though they may not be the best, time will tell, because it is technically still a situational card. It's a slow card because it's expensive and it's uninkable, and you need to have a setup for it. You need to have a board state where you know that I'm going to play this and use my characters to out yours. So it's a very situational card, and for that reason, it's usually considered a bad thing. But if this card does pop off, like, you will likely win the game, because the interaction that you can get off of a card like this is a game-winning play. Like, if say for example you're going up against an aggro strategy and they're just sitting there with like 2 or 3 readied characters waiting to protect them before they quest with them, and then you shift this, tap down their board, and then just take out all of their weak aggro threats, it's like they just lose so much advantage and so much tempo. It's almost impossible for them to come back with, right? If you think back to the Disney Lorcana challenge in Bologna, I remember I was watching I think I tuned in very briefly to like round 3. It was Sapphire Steel versus Emerald Steel, and the Emerald player ended up getting like 2 more Diablos on board, and the Sapphire Steel player was coming up to turn 5, and they just grabbed your swords. And like right there, the match was over, because that's how big of a tempo swing of a board wipe could be against those kind of decks. And the Anna can help you facilitate something like that, right? Again, situationally, because you need a board state yourself in order to do it. It's not like a Be Prepared where it just wipes everything right away. But this card, does impactful things for ink pairings that are not Ruby, which is what I think the purpose of it is. Anyways, moving on, we got Archimedes Electrified Owl. This card, in my opinion, just not great. 5 cost, inkable, 1/4. Maybe in draft again, but in constructed play, this one stat line gets outed by absolutely everything from small Sisu, big Sisu, Brawl, Medusa, right? You name it, it takes it out. A Shift 3, you know, if you're going to play the 1-drop Archimedes, which again, you can't do in draft since that's Chapter 1. But, you know, Shift 3, yes, could be okay. Quest for 2 has evasive, Challenger 3, so you got a 4/4 body for 3 potentially, but you did pay to lose your existing Archimedes to shift this on top of it, and it does Quest for 2. So, you know, there's kind of a lot of different things at odds here. It's like I'm putting something on board that's potentially an aggro threat, but I want to challenge with it, and it's just underwhelming because it's 1/4 when it's not challenging. And, you know, it's just, yeah, it has evasive, so it's kind of protected, but then it just gets outed by everything else anyways. It's just, in my opinion, not a great card. Not something that I'm a big fan of, at least anyways. Contrast to that, one of the best cards in Amethyst now, in the entire game, in my opinion, up there with Mim Fox and what was Queen's Castle before we got all this location removal in Shimmering Skies, is Elsa the Fifth Spirit. I've talked about this quite a bit, so I'm not going to elaborate too much on this, but I am happy to see this card dropping in price because, yeah, I want to pick up 4 foil ones, and I don't want to pay like whatever they're going for right now, $10 each Canadian. $40 for a playset of foil super rares that are in a starter deck is just absurd. So hopefully this does hit about $5 or so Canadian, because that's what the Queen is also similar. Like the Queen foil is an amazing card, and it's like $1 or $2, right? So I think that this card will probably end up dropping a little bit. The issue is I think you get a lot more value out of a card like this than the Queen. Immediately. The Queen long term is obviously a better card because if the Queen sticks, the amount of advantage that thing can give you is insane, especially all the things that it can facilitate, like Under the Sea and whatnot. But a card like this allows you to just get value right away. You play this, you exert a character with the crystallize ability, and you don't have to necessarily take it out with this Elsa. You can take it out with whatever else you have on board. So if it's like a bigger character that Elsa can't out right away, you use your existing threats to out that card that you just tapped down. But this being an inkable tap down card is very relevant. It being evasive, having rush is very relevant, because you can pair this, and I did this in my gameplay video where like I used Ruby Chromacons to make this, like I had 2 on board and I made this a 4/5 body. You can use medallion weights if you have an extra 2 ink to make this a 4/5 body and then draw a card when it challenges as well. So there's a lot of cool interactions, especially with Ruby and strength modulating cards that you can use with this. Speaking of the Queen, you know, if you have a Queen on board already, and you play this, tap down an opponent's threat, then you quest with the Queen, boost up the Elsa to be a 6/5 body, reduce that thing you just tapped down to be like a 0 whatever body, and the Elsa just takes it out for free, right? Like there's just so many cool interactions with this card, and then at best, you know, or sorry, at worst, it's just ink anyways. So real improvement over like Pinocchio, which we were all struggling to try to fit in and play when we needed to. But yeah, definitely one of the best cards. If not, this might be the best card in all of Amethyst out of this set. Better than Mim, I think, too, even. But yeah, really good card. Glad it's in the starter deck, so props to Ravensburger for recognizing to make playable cards accessible via the starter decks. Next up, we got Genie Main Attraction. So 7 cost uninkable 5/5 body that quest for 2. When this character is exerted, opposing characters can't ready at the start of their turn. Kind of underwhelming for a legendary, which is unfortunate because, you know, the art is great, and Genie is one of the coolest characters in all of Disney, in my opinion, played by the late great Robin Williams, of course, in the animated film. Really hoping that we get a nice playable Genie. I was trying to make this card work multiple ways. Like what I was thinking was maybe on 8 ink you play this and then you play Cogsworth to give this rush, and then you can use this to you know, exert right away and rush into a character. Then you lock down your opponent's board. But you know, that's a 2-card combo. You need 8 ink, so you can't play it on curve on 7. This is a 5/5 body that quest for 2 as well, so it's kind of cool. But you know, in trying to cook this up, I was talking to my friend and he was like, well, why don't you just play the Elsa from set 1? Because it's 8 ink as well, and it just gets you value right away. You don't need to set up any combo or anything with it, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's true. So the Elsa is just better. For that reason, I don't think that this card really sees any play, unfortunately, and it is probably overpriced for what it is, aside from it being a really cool collectible item, you know, being the Genie. But yeah, I think you just always play Elsa over this. Like, I doubt there's ever a situation where your opponent has like 5 or 6 exerted characters, and you're just like, I need to lock down their board with the Genie, because at that point, you're probably already losing the game. So yeah, it's like neither here nor there for me on this one. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. Let me know in the comment section below if you disagree. But I really would like it to be good because, like I said, Genie's one of my favorite characters, but I just don't think it is really too relevant. Next up, we got this Olaf. So this is Amethyst's version of their 9 cost uninkable, you know, reduced by 1 for a certain condition. Not really a huge fan of these cards because, again, they are very situational. Now, inherently, if you can play this for like 6, or if your opponent has like 3 exerted characters on board, you know, you pay 6 for a 6/6 body that quests for 3 and has evasive. This is a big threat because it either quests for a lot or it's outing a lot of threats. And again, I just think it's too hard because it's not worth the risk of playing this and having this in your opening, you know, first 5 draws or your opening hand. It's just a dead card for so long. And if you're at a point where you can pay this for like 3, 4, or 5, you're probably already losing the game. If your opponent has like 4 or more characters exerted on board, like, you're probably already really behind, and this card's not going to help you claw back advantage. So, in my opinion, not a great card. But again, would love to be proven wrong on this because I think these cards are interesting concepts. I just don't think this one in particular is good. Okay, so to pair with the new Maleficent super rare that we got, we also have some new common and uncommon Maleficents released in this set. So this one is a 3-cost inkable. So again, competing for the Maleficent Sorcerer slot, which draws a card. Maleficent Vexed Partygoer, a 0/4 that quests for 2, which is nice. But again, you know, 0 stat line, gets outed by everything in Ruby. Whenever this character quests, you may choose and discard a card to return chosen character item or location with cost 3 or less to the player's hand. So you might just think right away, well, Quantum, if the first big Maleficent was terrible, this one is also just absolutely just the worst. First of all, 3 cost, right? There's a lot of competition in that that cost slot. This is a 0/4, so it gets outed right away by everything. And then you have to discard a card to proc its ability. So it just seems like it's very, very bad. However, that's not the case. And it's not the case because of one new card that we got in Shimmering Skies that absolutely devastates Ruby Amethyst. And that card is Prince John's Mirror. If your opponent on 3 goes Prince John Mirror and they pass it back to you, if you have this on board already, and let's say you have 6, 7 cards in hand, you draw for turn, you quest with this, you discard a card, you bounce the Prince John Mirror back. Now you don't have to discard cards at the end of your turn until you have 3 or less, or 3 cards. Which means that you disrupt their tempo. If they want to replay that Prince John's Mirror, they're giving up another whole turn to play it. And then you're going to be able to further dump your hand so that you can play under the Prince John Mirror without losing too much advantage. So because of that one interaction, I think this card might actually be played potentially. Because again, at worst it's just ink. It's still a 2-quester. If you're up against into Ruby matches, you probably just ink this, right? Because again, 0/4, it gets outed by so many things. And you know, the 4 toughness stat, like, it does survive a decent amount of challenges potentially. So it could probably quest for 2 to 4 lore in the meantime. And then you could potentially bounce other things along with it, right? Not necessarily the Prince John Mirror, but any other threats in other matchups as well. So it's not necessarily a terrible card. But again, this is another one of those cards where I would say is very side deck worthy if we ever get side decks in this game, because I'd definitely be playing this if I knew I was going up against an Emerald Steel deck playing the Prince John Mirror, I think, because it's my only way to deal with that kind of card, I believe. But other than that, it's like, yeah, what's the point? So interesting card there. I did not end up picking up foil ones of this. I probably should look at grabbing them though for that reason. I just talked myself into it. Monstro from Pinocchio, 5-cost inkable 5/6 body that quests for 1, whale of a whale. Nothing to see there, just a big body. You know, again, a lot of other things to play on 5. The Magica De Spell is very interesting. Cruel Sorceress, a 4-cost inkable 2/5 body during opponent's turns. If an effect will cause you to discard 1 or more cards from your hand, you don't discard it. Quest for 1. It is a rare. Very underwhelming in my opinion. Not sure why this card was so expensive to begin with. It definitely come down quite a bit, but this doesn't play around the Prince John Mirror, right? Because Prince John Mirror says during the end of your turn, so like when it's my turn, if I have the Magica De Spell on field and the opponent has a Prince John Mirror, I still discard. I believe that's how that interaction works. But then, you know, if I go down to 3 cards and my opponent goes, you have forgotten me, and I have this card in play, it's like I don't discard, right? If they go Lucifer, I don't discard. But you need a way to play around the Prince John Mirror, I think. But all in all, this card, I think, again, another card that's like side deck worthy. I mean, in matchups where it's not great, you ink it. It quests for. I think it would have been better if it was a 3/5 body, or it quested for 2. I think it just needed a little bit more to make it more applicable to play in decks, because I don't want to play a card like this, just to have better play against discard decks. Because if I don't face discard decks, this card just is absolutely dead. What's also interesting to note, I guess it could come up too, is that, like, I guess it's not completely dead, because if you go up against like Sapphire Steel, if they whole new world you won't be discarding your hand if you have this on board, right? You just draw 7, I believe. I don't know how Whole New World is worded exactly. Actually, I have a 4 copy in front of me. I just got it in the mail today. Each player discards their hand and draws 7 new cards. So it doesn't say if they discard their hand, they draw 7. So you would not discard your hand and you would draw 7 new cards if you had this card in play when your opponent attempted to Whole New World. So this card, I guess, does have dual application. Just like kind of talking this through, thinking this through myself here. So it has counterplay against discard, and then it potentially has counterplay against Whole New World decks, which inherently also has counterplay against Amber Steel Song. The issue is Amber Steel Song and Sapphire Steel might be Whole New Worlding before you even get this card on the field. And you're not playing 4 of this anyways, right? So again, it's still kind of really awkward to maybe set this up to counter things like that. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's not worth it. It needed a little bit more. If it quested for 2 and was like 3/5 body, I think it would have been played. But because of the stats, like I just don't think you get enough value, because in every other matchup it's like completely dead. And then again, even the matchups where it's good, like you have to see it at the right time, which is kind of hard. So I don't know. Just a little underwhelming overall. Anyways, moving on, 2-cost Inkable Maleficent. So another Maleficent, a 2/2 body that quests for 2. So again, these stats are not great, because it gets outed by everything. But again, this is a shift target, right? Potentially. I don't know, like 1-drop Maleficent, 1/1 body that quests for 2, 2-cost body that quests for 2. That's a 2/2. You know, maybe there's some like super aggro Ultra Maleficent deck you could play as like a fun theme deck. Maybe, yeah, I was saying like it's not really a thing right now, but maybe as a casual deck it's a thing, but definitely not as a meta contender, I don't think. But how cool is that, eh? You're playing a bunch of small Maleficents and you just level up to the boss one. And this is great artwork, by the way. If anything, that's the reason I would play it. So, you know, all the art is like really great job with the art here for the artist, man. Like these artists are on fire. Anyways, moving on to Rafiki, Shaman Duelist. A 4-cost uninkable 1/4 with Rush, quest for 2, and when you play this character, he gains +4 this turn. Okay, or Challenger, sorry. When you play this character, he gains +4 Challenger this turn. You get to get +4 while challenging. So you play this, you get immediate value being a 5/4 body, taking out a threat. Then he just sits there and he's very vulnerable because he already has like 2 or 3 points of damage on him probably. And then your opponent just outs it with whatever character they have on board because they only take 1 damage back, and he just gets taken out by anything with 2 strength or more most likely. If he does survive, he does not get the Challenger again, but he will quest for 2. In Amethyst decks, I don't think this sees play in Ruby Amethyst because the uninkable counts there are very tight, but this could potentially be played in Sapphire Amethyst. Again, the 4-cost ink curve is very, very tight there because you got the other Amethyst cards like the Merlin cards competing, as well as Hiram potentially. But in the Sapphire Amethyst deck, you need Rush, you need answers to outboards, and this card can help you do that. And then you could also bounce this back to hand so that you have this to play later. Between this card and Mim Fox being on 3 and 4, you do have very strong rush-oriented characters to deal with big threats on the opponent's side, aggro threats on the opponent's side to help stabilize. So in a deck like Sapphire Amethyst, I see this card potentially getting played. Also, on Sapphire side, you also have things like Popsicles potentially, which can heal up this card after it's challenged. Therefore, it's a 1/4 body with full health. That's a little bit harder for your opponent to out, which means now you have utility to quest for 2 and then bounce this back to hand, and then use it again as a rush interaction, right? With the Elsa and stuff too, like, you know, later on in the game when you're on like 9 ink, you could get a lot of value off this. Elsa coming down, tapping down a threat, dropping Rafiki, taking out that threat, that kind of thing. So very interesting. You can see it's not a lot of people are putting it in their decks because, yeah, it's just really underwhelming. I did pick up 4 foil ones of this because it was like $2 each, and I was like, why not? Like, I think this is in the starter deck as well, but there are certain decks and budget decks that will play this over other rush oriented cards. This Anna, I'm not going to elaborate too much on it. It's kind of suffering from the same thing as Pinocchio. While you don't choose, your opponent gets to choose. If you do play this on curve, your opponent will likely only have 1 readied character anyways. But the 3-cost uninkability really kills it, in my opinion. If it was inkable, I think it would be a lot better. 1/3 stat line, very underwhelming, and obviously the reason why this is here is we want to play this for the bigger Anna that we can shift onto. Again, really unfortunate that they made both of them uninkable. Like, this one should have been inkable in my opinion, but it might have been too strong. So I'm not necessarily disagreeing with it, but I think that really limits the applicability of this bigger card here, because within its own ink type, it doesn't really have a lot of play. So like I said, really the only thing I can think of is like Sapphire, where you would really want to play this, because yeah, even the chapter 1 Anna isn't the greatest anyways too, so you're not going to be playing that either. All right, we're almost done with the characters here. King of Hearts, Monarch of Wonderland, a 1/4 body that quests for 2, 4 cost inkable. You exert it, choose exerted character they can't ready at the start of their next turn. So again, not anything that you're likely going to play in Constructed, probably decent in Draft though. And then you have Camilo Madrigal. So this card is very interesting. I bought a foil one for $12, but I see that the non-foils have drastically come down to about $2.50 each. So I'll probably look at picking up a playset because it's so cheap. And you know, a playset of this is what, $7.50 Canadian, which is basically the price of a pack. So I can buy 3 legendaries for the price of a pack. Camilo Madrigal, and by the way, my friend pointed this out, they're shape-shifting as Bruno, I guess, in this one. This is a 6 cost inkable 3/7 body. So immediately it's like, okay, it gets Ice Block Brawled, it gets Medusa, right? Like, it's kind of underwhelming. It has to sit there for a turn to proc the ability. It only quests for 1. Right, whenever this character quests, you may gain lore equal to the lore of another chosen character of yours, and then you return that character to your hand. It would have been cool to make this the lore of any character on board, and then return that character to the hand. Because imagine having this on board, and your opponent has like, they're like, oh, I don't want to play my Tamatoa now because like you're just going to gain the same lore as me if I dime it and then bounce it back to my hand. Like, I don't want that to happen. So I think that would have been cooler and made this card a lot more applicable. But this card is still decent. Because when you think about this card, you got to think about Arthur from, what was it, Rise of the Floodborn? And Arthur is a 1/3 uninkable 3 cost character that also has the same ability, that when you quest with it, you basically choose a character and bounce it back to your hand, and then you can gain 2 lore. So this card allows you to gain the lore of that character instead of gaining the 2 lore. So you could potentially gain a lot more lore or 1 lore instead of 2. Why this card is good, in my opinion, is because there's a lot of interactions where you want to return a character to your hand to replay it. So I'm kind of spoiling it because I want to pick up more foil copies of this before they go back up in price. I saw some for 10 and I didn't buy them, and then they sold out like right away, unfortunately. But when I think about a card like this, I think about Amethyst Amber again. I think about obviously Ruby Amethyst. I think about Amethyst Steel. And Amethyst Steel, being able to cycle something like the Pete over and over again is very strong, locking your opponent out of actions indefinitely if they can't, during their turn, out the Camilo or the Pete without an action. When I think of Amber, I think of bouncing back a Rapunzel, dropping it to heal up a threat and draw more cards. I think of bouncing back a Hades, drop it again to recur a character from the discard. When I think about Ruby, I think about what I used to do with Arthur. Bounce back the Lady Tremaine, bounce back Madame Medusa. Now I have that card to replay to out more threats. Maleficent Dragon, if you play those, if you end up going control top heavy version. So I think this card is good, especially for its price right now. I know for me, I'm picking up a playset as soon as I can. Because I think there is way more potential upside for this card given how low it is right now compared to it dropping to like what, $1? Like a legendary is not going to drop to $1. I think the lowest legendary I've ever seen is Milo in Emerald, and he was like $2.50. So this card is already like at rock bottom in my opinion. And Milo is, I don't want to say completely unplayable, but it's pretty not played, right? Obviously. So yeah, really, really interesting that this card dropped so low. I think it does rebound up though. All right, let's see how much faster we can get through these. I'm sure this video is getting on there in the length. Hypnotic Strength, a 2-cost inkable card. This one is interesting actually. I don't think it will see competitive play, but it potentially could if aggro is that prevalent in the meta, because what this card will allow you to do is turn your 1-drops into 4 and X bodies, and it draws a card so it replaces itself. So think about like your opponent goes first, drops a Daisy Duck, the 1/4, and then you're like, okay, drop like what, like a Chernobog Followers or something, right? And then your opponent's like, okay, quest with Daisy Duck, play another character, and you're like, okay, obviously I can't deal with that Daisy Duck. It's going to quest 1 or 2 more times, and you're going to get 6 lore off of it. It's terrible, but at least I get some card advantage off of it. Whatever. On turn 2, if you go Hypnotic Strength, make my Chernobog Followers a 4/1, I can immediately now trade out with the Daisy Duck, and I at least draw a card. So this card will replace itself. The issue is obviously you lose tempo, because they probably developed a character on turn 2, and then they're going to develop a character on turn 3 when they're on the play, whereas you just spent 2 turns outing their 1 Daisy Duck. But that's kind of what you have to do against aggro, right? With aggro, you only care about slowing them down enough that you can develop your game plan, then you don't really care how much negative advantage you lose in the beginning, as long as you can slow them down long enough that you can establish your game plan. The perfect example of that was with what happened in Bologna in the finals. The Amber Steel Song player, which is much more of an aggro-oriented build of Amber Steel Song, got to 19 lore, and then they looked like they were going to win the game, but then the Ruby Sapphire player started getting their game plan rolling and drawing a lot of cards, having a lot of removal, and the Amber Steel Song player just could not get a card to stick to quest for the final bit of lore that they needed in order to win the game, and then the Ruby Sapphire player ended up taking it. So really all it takes is for you to stabilize, and this card can help you do that. But is it good enough? Because again, you play this in other matchups, potentially. Like, it's not necessarily a bad card. Getting extra strength to take out a threat and it replaces itself isn't necessarily bad. So I think, if you can get a foil playset for like $1 or something, it's probably worth it. Finders Keepers is an interesting one. A 5-cost action, draw 3 cards. Not anything too relevant, I don't think. Probably really good in draft, but in constructed, I just think there are better draw engines that you would utilize. This is very slow, right? Sorcery speed, basically, in order to draw 3. Next up, we Know the Way. This is a song, 3-cost inkable. Very interesting card. I will probably look at picking up a playset of this once it drops in price, but I don't think it's very relevant right now. So you shuffle a chosen card from your discard into your deck, and then you reveal the top card of your deck. If it has the same name as the chosen card that you shuffled, you may play that revealed card for free, otherwise put it into your hand. So at worst, you put an important potential resource in your discard back into your deck, so similar to what Magic Broom did from the first chapter, and then you reveal the top card of your deck and you get that card to your hand. In let's say character specific decks like Maleficent decks, could you imagine targeting like a 1-cost Maleficent biding her time, shuffling it into your deck, revealing this Maleficent formidable queen on turn 3, right? That's really strong. Or even if you get any of the other Maleficents, like they're not coming into play exerted like off of Mufasa or anything. So this card is potentially interesting depending on the kind of deck you want to use. In character focused decks, obviously I think this is a lot stronger, which we won't probably see for a while as being a meta contender, but a card that if it goes for like a quarter, right, you just get a playset for $1 or something, just keep it, and it's $1, so like who cares, and then it might become good and it might end up being worth like $5 each one day, right, when we get even more Maleficents that are playable or something. Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom, I've already talked about this. Outside of aggro decks, I don't think this card is very good, but in aggro decks, this card could potentially be absolutely broken, because we know, like I just mentioned to you about the interaction on Bologna in the finals, not that player was on Amethyst, but if they were, they don't need a character to stick, right? If they have access to things like goats and, gathering your knowledge, they just play it and gain the lore and win the game. So these non-questing sources of lore, as I've talked about many, many, many times before, are critical points of interaction that your opponent has to play around. So in certain situations when they're like, I don't need to out your characters and stuff right now, I'm going to just opt to do this stronger play to develop my board, they might have to think, I have to deal with your characters, because if I don't, it puts you on like 18 or 17 and you can close out the game with like a Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom and a goat or whatever. So it does those kinds of things in certain matchups when you're playing an aggro deck that really has to check your opponent as to what their lines of play are in order to stay in the game. So yeah, in aggro decks, which I'm sure if you scroll down here, you'll see it's being played in a ton of Amber Amethyst aggro. Not really sure why it's being put into Sapphire Amethyst, but I think in Amber aggro, yes, you absolutely play this card. Magical Aid is an interesting one. The ability is good. Chosen character gains Challenger +3. When this character is banished in a challenge, return this card to your hand. The problem with it is, it's cost 3. It's slow. It's an action. You have to have a developed character that you want to be able to give Challenger 3 and get back to your hand already, and as well have an opponent's card that's exerted that you can actually get the ability off on. What immediately comes to mind, obviously, is using this with things like Goat and Rabbit, because you want to get those cards banished, and you would love to get them back to your hand instead of them going to the banish pile, because it gains you extra advantage either through card draw or lore gain. Again, the issue is you're having to be in a very certain situation in order to set a card like this up. In general, it's not a bad card anyways, but I just think, again, there are just better ways to facilitate removal and bouncing, right, rather than needing this particular interaction. What's unfortunate, or not unfortunate, but what's potentially really strong, and I'll share this secret sauce, is the Floodborn Fairy Godmother, which can shift for 2, is potentially insanely strong if we ever get that 1-cost shift target for Fairy Godmother, because similar to what the Queen can do, if the Fairy Godmother gives this same ability to all the characters on board when she quests, if she's able to shift very early, not that you necessarily need to shift her on two, but like obviously because you won't have any other threats, but like if you have the ability to shift her and gain value off of such a low cost shift, like that kind of interaction where you gain Challenger 3 and the card goes back to your hand when banished is like a game winning play, right? Because you out an opponent's board, you get all the card advantage back to your hand, and you're just able to replay your characters later. That's a game winning play, right? So interesting card. I do like it, but it's probably better in draft than in constructed. So Retrosphere, a 1-cost inkable item. You pay 2 to banish it. Return chosen character item or location with cost 3 or less to the player's hand. Again, not a card that I think sees main deck play. If side decks were a thing, this card would probably be in the side deck, either this or Maleficent. But your card like this helps you deal with, once again, the Prince John's Mirror. You don't have hard outs to locations, which is unfortunate. Locations or items, that is. But you do have ways to slow them down, tempo orient them, to make them recast the Prince John Mirror, so that at the end of your turn, you're not having to discard to 3. And it buys you more time so that you can play out your hand more, so that you can get down to 3 so that you don't have to discard. Plus, like I said, it's a tempo disruptor, so your opponent has to replay that on turn 4 now instead of doing something else on turn 4 if they want to stick the Prince John Mirror. So it's an interesting interaction. It is unfortunate, but I don't think it sees main deck play necessarily. The Half Hexwall Crown. So this card is actually good. The issue is it costs 6. And when you play a very expensive item, you need to get insane amounts of value out of it, similar to like Lucky Dime, because now we have a big problem with items in Cusco and the new action card. I think it's called Hidden Away or something, because those cards put the items into your Inkwell, which means your Tamatoa can't get them back. And if you pay 6 to play an item like this, or 7 to play a Lucky Dime, and it gets put into your Inkwell next turn, you just lost a lot of tempo. If this card sticks, it's insanely strong because you pay 2. And again, this card is only a card you play in like Sapphire Amethyst, I think, because it's the only deck that can really afford to ramp up and then replace the card advantage that you use to ramp with like Fishbone, Mickey, One Jump, etc. But you pay 2, you draw a card, or you pay 2, discard a card, and exert a chosen character. So similar to the interaction that you get with Elsa in this set, you can just start exerting stuff. You can generate a lot of card advantage through Amethyst Sapphire already. And this card could be played like as a one-of, where you can tutor it out with like Merlin if you're in a grind game, and then you have a card draw engine if you know your opponent can't answer this, or you just ink it with Fishbone if it's not good. But I think it's really risky to play. But if it does stick, it is potentially very strong, because similar to what Queen's Mirror, I think it was called, in set 1, that card cost 2. It was uninkable, I believe, and then you had to pay 4 and exert it to draw a card, right? This card is a higher upfront cost, but then you pay 2 and exert to draw a card. So it's a lot more manageable to just draw a card every turn, especially in Sapphire, where you'll be on like 10 or more ink very, very quickly. And the thing with Sapphire is I just need a way to replenish my hand, and this card does that very efficiently for you. So interesting. Yeah, you can see here being used in Sapphire Amethyst, but not being used outside of it because, again, it's a very hard sell, but it is a good card draw engine. Speaking of card draw engine, we get another item that draws cards, the Amethyst Chromacon, the card that a lot of people are putting in their Amber Amethyst aggro decks, rightfully so, because you don't really care about how much advantage you give your opponent. If all the cards you give them, they won't even be able to play, because the game will be over by the time they're even able to attempt to start playing the game. But you exert it, each player may draw a card. The issue with playing this in aggro is that you have to take 2 ink to play it. And that's 2 ink that you're using to not develop an aggro threat. So this is why, like in my version, for example, I opted to maybe try out the location that we'll take a look at in this set, because at least if you play that location, you're at least gaining 1 passive lore every turn, and then you're threatening additional card draw if your characters are banished. This card is technically stronger because you get the card draw right away, but it is a tempo disruptor potentially, at least to play it out initially, and then it also gives your opponent card draw, which could backfire on you. But yeah, it is definitely a card that will see play, I think, especially in the Amber Amethyst deck, but also in Jafar Wheel. I also built a Jafar Wheel version. Oh, here's mine. What am I saying? Mine's right here. Because yeah, you basically give your opponent a bunch of cards, and then you just wheel them all the way anyways, right? So, and then this card can help proc the Jafar. So you make sure the Jafar is exerted, then you exert this to draw a card, you gain a lore, you know, while you draw. So like, yeah, it works in Jafar. I don't know if Jafar makes a comeback because of a card like this, but it is very interesting. And then we'll take a look at the final 2 cards here. Elsa's Ice Palace. So this card I think is really being overlooked right now. I don't think it sees main deck play, but it could. So basically, like in Yu-Gi-Oh, you have cards that don't really see play anymore and never really saw play even when the game was very simplified, like when it was like only 3 sets in. Cards like Spellbinding Circle or Shadow Spell, where it's a trap card and it freezes your opponent's monster. They can't attack or do anything with it, right? This card, you pay 3, it's uninkable. You have a 1 move cost, not that you would really move anything here. You're basically just playing this as an item that gains you 1 lore every turn, but can be outed by 4 damage into it. And when you play this location, choose an exerted character, so the opponent has to have an already exerted character, and while this location is in play, that character can't ready at the start of their turn. So this card has good application early, mid, and late game. Early game, it can stop a pretty significant aggro threat. Think about these aggro decks putting back in like Pinocchio Star Attraction, the 3 quester. You put this down, you lock up that Pinocchio, right? It doesn't ready up. If your opponent, like, what is your aggro opponent going to do? Take all their, you know, 1 strength aggro characters and run them all into the Elsa's Palace so they can untap their Pinocchio? It's like, no, right? Like, so that Pinocchio is probably going to stay indefinitely tapped, and you're just going to out it very easily. Or you just leave it alone because it doesn't do anything, right? Unless they actually want to take out the location, which if they do, then you can spend your next turn taking out the Pinocchio because it's going to take another whole turn for that Pinocchio to ready up. Into like more mid-range decks, this thing can help keep something like a Queen tapped down, right? Like the Queen Commanding Presence, which stops it from proccing the ability to easily out this location. In late game, this card can just buy you a turn, right? You know, if your opponent quests with a Tamatoa, you probably lose the game anyways, but let's say they quest with, I don't know, a Surfer Stitch or something, like in Amber. You play this, you lock up the Surfer Stitch for a turn. Yes, your opponent probably outs this location during their next turn, but at least you stop them from readying up their Surfer Stitch, right? So this card is potentially okay for its ability to stick longer and disrupt the game longer, but even if it gets outed right away, it at least buys you a potential turn, right? Because how many times have you come into a situation where you're like, oh my gosh, I would have had game if I could just get 1 more turn, but I can't deal with everything on the opponent's board because I can only challenge into a few things, and like I just can't out everything. But you don't need to out everything if you can do something like this and just keep something tapped down. So like, I didn't end up buying any copies of this, but I probably will pick up a playset because I mean, if I can get like a playset for $1, like why not? Again, it might not have any meta relevance. It probably doesn't, but it does have some potential use. If it was inkable, I think it definitely would be good. And to be fair, you know, it does gain you 1 lore, right? Every turn. Against an aggro strategy, like locking up one of their threats and gaining a lore every turn, that's pretty good in my opinion. And even, like I said, even against other decks, like just locking up a threat for a turn, even if this gets outed in the next turn and you don't gain lore or anything, is not necessarily the worst. So yeah, interesting card. I think it is being overlooked right now. And then the final card is the Library, a gift for Belle. 3 cost inkable, 1 cost to move here, 8 toughness, or 8 willpower location, and it gains you a lore passively every turn. So in my aggro build, which probably, oh, it is on here, it's the first one on here, okay. I opted to maybe try this instead of the Chromacon for the main reason that if on 3 I play this card and I have my aggro threats up with like bodyguards or something, if I spend a turn moving everything to the library and then questing with them, my opponent has to either have a perfect line of play to do enough damage into my library that I don't get any card draw, in which case if they do, all of my aggro threats live that I moved to the library and therefore I can quest with them again, or they just deal with all the aggro threats to prevent me from getting excessive amounts of lore, in which case I draw cards off of this card, off of them being at the library. And again, the fact that this card gets you lore every turn and it has 8 willpower makes it a bit more, like, it sticks a little bit harder than the Amethyst Chromacon. Yes, the Amethyst Chromacon gets you the card draw right away, but like, I lose a little bit of that like aggro pressure when I play the Chromacon potentially, right? I'm giving my opponent that extra little bit of time to get into the game and stabilize. Whereas a card like this, it just keeps the pressure on them. Yes, you can argue, well, Quantum, what you're saying doesn't make sense because you're going to spend the next turn paying the 1 ink to move everything to this location. It's like, yeah, but then I can just quest with everything again once again, and I'm still gaining 1 lore. And then I put my opponent in an awkward position where I say, you have to answer this or that. So I'm either gaining an extra quest step with my characters because they're answering the location. Again, I could be thinking about this wrong, but that's my thought. I need to test it, obviously, to see if it's good. But I think this is a good location and worth taking a look at. So anyways, that's going to wrap it up. The Enchanteds, you know, they all look kind of nice. I know a lot of people are a big fan of the Archimedes, but I personally like the Finders Keepers one here. I think that artwork is fantastic. So yeah, Rachel, great job. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for Amethyst. Stay tuned for Emerald next. If you made it this far in the video, thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.